Real quick, before we get into part 2 of season 4, if you need a part 1 recap, I've got you. Just hit the tab in the upper right-hand corner. Now, part 2 picks up right after Ruth left the house when Marty gets a phone call from Javi telling him that he needs to clean up a mess and he expects him in Chicago because he set up a meeting with Claire Shaw from Shaw Medical. He wants to renegotiate the terms of the deal. And the cleanup, that's going to be cleaning up the mess he left on the Snell farm. At no point does Marty reveal to Javi that he knows about the Snell farm incident and that Ruth is coming to kill him. And Wendy thinks that is stupid. Marty doesn't want to tell him because that puts Ruth in danger. And the way that Wendy looks at it, by keeping Javi alive, it keeps the family safe. And Ruth put herself in danger. Unfortunately for Wendy, it's 3 versus 1. Jonah gets so turned off by the conversation that he asks Charlotte to take him back to the motel. That's how disgusted in his mother he is. Once the kids leave, Wendy hammers home that Marty should tell Javi. As she puts it, once Javi dies, they have no leverage with Navarro. And Marty thinks that Wendy is hiding behind the family safety angle. What he thinks is that Wendy doesn't want to jeopardize the deal she has with Claire and the foundation. Wendy looks at him and says, "Do I want Javi to die and mess up everything we've sacrificed? No, I don't." Which is even more of a reason to warn him. But Marty ain't about it. And Marty reminds Wendy, other than a name, Ruth doesn't even know who he is. And on top of it, how is she going to track him down? But Wendy knows about determination and knows that if you're determined enough, you'll get the job done. And Ruth is definitely determined. And she's right, because while they were arguing about that, Ruth headed over to the motel to get any information on Javi she could from Jonah and Charlotte. It takes a little bit of convincing, but Charlotte tells Ruth about the meeting in Chicago, and Jonah hands over a picture of Javi. After getting the information and some petty cash, she heads home, but Wendy's waiting for her. Wendy felt like if Marty wasn't going to do this, she needed to take matters into her own hands. She tells Ruth that if she wants to kill Javi, the birds aren't going to stand in her way. But Javi is on a plane back to Mexico, and he won't be back for a few months. When he comes back in the country, they can make it happen. Ruth knows that this is a lie, but she doesn't let on to Wendy. Just says, yeah, okay, sounds good. And not only is Javi not on a plane to Mexico, he's arrived in Chicago. Checked into a hotel when he gets a phone call from Marty, because Marty headed over to the Snell farm to clean it up, but the place is swarming with cops. Ruth must have tipped them off already. This frustrates Javi a little bit, and he tells him, just get to Chicago. And by the way, bring the financials for my uncle's children. I need those. But Marty isn't the only one that's headed to Chicago. Ruth is on her way. She made a pit stop in Kansas City to get a gun from Frank Jr., and she has bad intentions with that thing. She dreams about going up to Javi and just shooting him point blank. But as she's on her way there, she gets a phone call from Marty. At first, it's a check-in, but it's also a business-related matter because Sheriff Guerrero was asking him if he knew where Ruth was, and he didn't. Ruth tells him that she'll go see her soon, and she just needs a little bit of time to get her head straight. Marty, though, is concerned about her mental well-being. He asks her, "Are you okay?" And she says she's okay, but she's not. She hangs up the phone and continues to make her way to Chicago. She arrives and parks outside of the Shaw Medical Building. She's scoping the place out when she gets a phone call from 3. 3 has the typical questions when, your brother gets murdered. But by her reaction, he can also tell that she knows who did it. He asks her to come home, and she says, "I'll be home soon." That night, she can't sleep, and she starts walking around Chicago, listening to music. And that's when she runs into rapper Killer Mike. She is a huge fan. And seeing him and meeting him causes Ruth to smile for the first time in days. After this chance encounter, she heads back to her car and sleeps in it for the night. When she gets up the next morning, she makes sure to call up Shaw Medical, pretending to be Charlotte, asking when the meeting is. And she finds out it's at 10 a.m. She sees Javi go in the building, and she's planning on killing him when he exits. And inside, Javi had called the meeting because he wants to make the relationship between his drug cartel and Shaw Medical a long-term relationship. He's going to give her a 20% price reduction for 5 years. In return, he wants stock options, which is virtually impossible. Giving stock options to somebody in a drug cartel, that's going to raise red flags. Javi proposes that she put it in his mother's name, but you're the sister and a mother of 2 people in a drug cartel. It's also going to raise red flags. There's also the matter of the shareholders. You have to explain to them why someone's getting stock options. And Javi tells Claire, your shareholders are going to be happy if your company does well. He brings up a similar situation because when he was in business school, there was a teacher there who treated him like crap. But now that same teacher is the president of the business school, and he's arranged a dinner that night with Javi to discuss a sizable donation. Somehow, this guy, knowing what Javi's family does, is willing to put that aside for the money. He's hinting to Claire Shaw that she should do the same thing. Javi then turns to Marty and asks, "Did you bring my brother's financial records? The ones for the legitimate holding companies?" And Marty did indeed. But when Javi tells him that he wants all of them to be transferred into his mother's name, Marty reminds him that those are supposed to be for Omar's children. Javi brushes that aside, saying, "We're all family. I'll make sure they're taken care of." The meeting then wraps up, and Javi leaves, and he's unaware of the fact that outside, he's being stalked by Ruth. But Ruth completely chickens out. She can't bring herself to do it, not in broad daylight at least. As she's walking back to the car, she's seen by Marty. It's a good thing she's only seen by Marty and not Wendy, because Marty steps to the side and calls her up asking, "What the hell are you doing? Are you nuts? Go home." Ruth, however, looks at it like she's a failure and a coward. Marty tries to paint the picture that she's smart because she was just about to throw her life away and she didn't. Marty once again urges her to go home. And while she says that she will, she doesn't. She tails the birds, seeing everywhere they go. She sees when they go to an office space and check that out. She sees when they go and meet with Randall Schaefer. She also sees when they go check out this beautiful home they're planning on moving into. And she's jealous. She looks at it like the birds are building this whole life that should be her and Wyatt's. She follows them all day and even into the night when they meet with Claire Shaw for dinner. And that is when Ruth makes her move. She interrupts dinner and tells them, "We're going to Claire's office." Marty can't believe she's here because she said she was going home. Wendy's just annoyed, and Claire, she's just confused. When Claire starts demanding some answers, Ruth turns to the birds and says, "Tell her to take us to her office or I'll shoot her in the head right here and now." So at gunpoint, that's where they go. When they get there, she tells the birds, "Call them. Call them right now." And Claire continues to ask what's going on, and finally Wendy fills her in on what exactly Ruth is so upset about. Marty tries to convince her what a mistake this is, but that doesn't work. It actually pisses her off more. Eventually, Wendy calls Javi, telling him that he needs to come down to the office because Claire is giving him the stock options he wants, and he needs to sign the paperwork before he heads back to Mexico. And Javi had one hell of a night. He met with that professor. The same professor who wouldn't give him the time of day back in the day is now asking for money, but wants to make it an anonymous donation for, quote, obvious reasons. That doesn't sit well with Javi. He follows the guy into the bathroom and gives him an ultimatum. "I'll give you a $2 million donation and I want my name on a building, or I kick your ass and it's anonymous." He doesn't even let the teacher respond, and he beats the ever-loving crap out of him. So for Javi, he just got payback and he's about to get stock options? This is a win-win. He heads over to the building, but while he's on his way, everybody is trying to talk Ruth down from this. That includes Claire Shaw. And Ruth asks her, "Do you know who you're in business with? They'll tear everything you have to the ground." Wendy Bird, she's soulless. She's a predator that doesn't even know why it's killing anymore. And Marty? He pretends to care, but really, he doesn't have any emotion anymore. They make one last plea to Ruth, but it falls on deaf ears. A little while later, Javi shows up. He walks in, and he's ambushed by Ruth, who shoots and kills him. Both birds don't know if they're going to be next, but Ruth just stares at him and leaves, racing to her truck where she breaks down and cries. She leaves the birds and Claire to clean up the body. After the events that took place in Shaw Medical, the birds head back to their hotel room and they need a stiff drink. They also play a game of I Told You So, with Wendy pulling the I Told You So card. She thinks that Marty's an idiot for not predicting exactly what Ruth would do. They then start talking about what they're going to do. They no longer have the leverage they once did, and the deal with the FBI is probably done. Marty tells Wendy we can still get out with our lives, but she doesn't want to abandon the foundation. And Marty has to tell her, you can't have your cake and eat it too. We got to pick one or the other. Something has to give. I mean, we don't even know what's in Mexico and who's coming up for us and what they want. And Wendy tells them, then we need to find out. Before they do, Marty wants protection. The next morning, Wendy heads to Shaw Medical, but Claire isn't answering any of her phone calls. That security guard that Claire has heads down and tells her, what did you expect? After the stunt you pulled? Wendy then tells him to tell Claire, we can still get you what you need. The deal can still go down. Just tell her that. The birds then head back to the Ozarks. Wendy is pissed when she gets home, but she's pissed off at Jonah. She thinks that Jonah gave Ruth all the information that Ruth needed to track down Javi. Jonah, however, isn't at home. It's only Charlotte. And Wendy is very surprised when Charlotte tells her, I had a hand in it too, but I never thought that Ruth was actually to go through with it. The problem is, Charlotte just wasn't thinking. She was trying to help out Ruth because Ruth was going through a tough time after Wyatt died. They then have to stop the infighting because Agent Clay shows up from the FBI. She tells them that Javi's gone missing, and they just act like they don't know where he is. They do ask her, what does this mean for our deal? And she tells them, it means your deal's dead. But she also tells them there's a bigger trickle-down effect because of this. This is going to create an unstable situation in the Navarro cartel, and the Byrds were the last ones to be seen with Javi. So what she proposes is they testify against Omar, and they go into witness protection. They're not into that. And unfortunately, getting the deal back is going to be tough after the stunt that Maya pulled. Wendy then asks about extradition, getting Omar back in Mexico and putting him back in charge of the Navarro cartel. That way, he's just a puppet. But extradition for a guy like Omar Navarro is going to be near impossible. They're going to need to pull a lot of political strings, and by that point, it's probably too late. The cartel puts somebody else in charge. So they need it to happen fast. It's not impossible, it's just really going to be difficult. Marty asks her, what would it take for the FBI to believe that he's still in control? And Agent Clay tells him, money. Keep those seizures coming in, and maybe I can pitch it to my boss and convince him that this is the right move to make. But she thinks that that's really dumb. She once again tries to pitch them on going into witness protection, but they just don't want to do it. They'd rather go with this alternative route, and that means that Wendy is going to have to get a one-on-one with Omar, who is currently sitting in solitary confinement. But Agent Clay is not the only person that's looking for Javi. When Claire Shaw gets to her home, she's surprised to see a woman standing with two security guards. The woman introduces herself as the attorney for Javi Elizondo and his quote-unquote tile company. She's looking for Javi, and she's wondering if Claire knows anything because Javi had mentioned to her that he had secured a sweetener to their deal. Claire does confirm that she was able to get him the stock options, but she didn't see him. The new Helen Pierce doesn't buy any of it, but all she can really do in the moment is intimidate Claire, giving her her card and telling her, call me if anything changes. It does work as Claire is terrified. And she's also not returning the Byrds' calls. So the Byrds have two deals to deal with. The Shaw situation and the deal with Navarro. But while Wendy goes and deals with Navarro, Marty tries to get them a backdoor option. He goes and meets with Maya. He asks her if the deal that she proposed a little while back is still on the table. And she tells him no, it's not. She's disgusted by Marty. She's bitter about how she's being treated for doing what, in her opinion, was the right thing. And she no longer is interested in ever working with Marty Byrd. In her opinion, Marty Byrd is just another criminal, and she kicks him out. While Marty was meeting with Maya, Wendy went to meet with Omar, and it does not go well. She starts trying to pitch Omar on this deal, but he is incensed and enraged and threatens to kill her. Even though that's going to be really tough to do from solitary confinement, he vows to find a way. Even though the meeting didn't go well, once she gets out of the meeting, she calls Agent Clay and says that it did go well, lying. But she also says we got to get him out of solitary confinement, and we have to make him know that it was us who got him out. He's got to trust us. Agent Clay's surprised, but she says, I'll get it done. When she gets home, she tells Marty the exact same thing, that the meeting went well. He's angry, but he knows a good deal when he hears it. But Marty lets her know about another problem they have. Their dad is in town. He showed up with his church group, and he's going to search for Ben. He's even hired a private investigator, Mel Saddam. Mel wrapped up the Helen Pierce gig. He was pretty convinced that she was murdered. After all, she did work for a cartel, but he couldn't be sure. He asked Helen's ex-husband if he wanted him to pursue this, going down to Mexico, trying to dig around, but it's Erin who is completely against that. She doesn't want to dig, she doesn't want to know, because she knows how dangerous this could be for her family. So while Mel would continue to like the job, he can't. But when one door closes, another opens, his phone rings, and it's Nathan, Wendy's dad. And Wendy's dad showing up in town could not happen at a worse time. They call Nathan up and invite him over to the house where they try to convince him to get rid of Mel Saddam because they know how good of a private detective he is, but Nathan doesn't care that he used to bang lines of cocaine. All he's concerned with is finding Ben. Nathan believes the Lord guided him to the Ozarks, not just to find Ben, but he's also concerned about his grandchildren. It is concerning to him that Jonah is living in a motel after all. He tells Wendy, I'm not going anywhere. Then he heads back to the Lazy O. Right after Nathan leaves, Marty gets a phone call from the director of the funeral home that he owns, telling him that he's got a body of Wyatt Langmore, but he doesn't know what to do with it because Ruth isn't picking up the phone. Ruth has arrived back in the Ozarks. She's still grieving quite a bit. And Charles Ann, the girl that Ruth left Zeke with, has returned with Zeke. She doesn't want any parts of Zeke because Zeke has been put up all over the news as a missing child. She doesn't need that heat. Marty tells the guy that he's going to go deal with it, talk to Ruth, and just sit tight. He goes over to Ruth's place, but Ruth is as unresponsive to Marty as she was to the funeral director. Because of this and the guilt that he's feeling, he tells her, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it. I'll make it nice." When he gets home, Wendy is just getting off the phone with Claire, or I should say Claire's voicemail. She can't get a hold of Claire, and she also can't get a hold of Jim Ruddlesdorf. It seems like nobody is returning her calls. That's when Charlotte walks out of the house saying that she's going to go have dinner with her grandfather, and Wendy's not going to allow her to do it by herself. So the whole family heads to dinner with Nathan and Nathan's new girlfriend. They start talking about the tragedy that happened with Wyatt and how Wyatt's connection with Ruth is connected to Ben because they used to date. It then goes into subtle jabs with Nathan poking at Wendy for how she was when she was a child. Nathan's view of things is completely different and warped from Wendy's memory. Nathan looks at her like she was a troubled kid. Wendy looks at him like he was an abusive father. It's not a good relationship. And Wendy's big concern now is that Nathan is going to ruin her and Marty for the kids. On the drive back, after Wendy vents about her dad, Marty lets her know that he did go to talk to Maya. He thought it could protect them, but she wasn't interested in the deal. And that's probably because she has teamed up with Mel Saddam to get to the bottom of how dirty the birds are and what exactly happened to Ben. Mel has been able to figure out that on the day that Ben went missing, Wendy rented a car. So Wendy's lying. He couldn't get any more information on the car or where it went. There's only so much that a PI can do. He's hoping that Maya, with her FBI influence, can figure out where this car went. Maya will poke around, but it's going to be difficult because a lot of people in the Bureau are not fans of her at the moment. But one person's a big fan of her, Mel. He starts flirting with her and tells her that if she finds information out, he'll treat her to dinner. And if he finds out information first, she'll buy him dinner. And the next day, Maya's resources turn something up. It's just a surveillance video, but it's of a cop checking out a car, and his name is Cam Reddick. He works for the Marion Sheriff's Office. So Mel is going to hunt down that lead. As Mel goes to work, the birds get ready to go to a funeral. Wendy is all alone in the house when all of a sudden she sees Nelson, and she gets petrified. But it's not Nelson who's coming to kill her. Nelson is with a preacher named Father Benitez. The preacher is Omar Navarro's contact. As soon as he got into general population, he called the preacher up, and he's going to relay messages from the preacher to the birds. Well, the last meeting between Omar and Wendy was contentious, and he was threatening to kill her. Once he got into general population and started to think about it, he came around to her line of thinking, which is a big surprise to the preacher. He asks her, "Do you really believe that you can get him out?" And Wendy says, "Yeah, at least I want to try." Then the preacher asks, "Are you sure?" Because deep down, even though the preacher is working with Omar Navarro and he's known him for a while, he thinks it's best for Wendy and the rest of the birds to leave Omar in prison and get the hell out. Father Benitez then stands up and says, "He will see you tomorrow." And Wendy asks, "Does he know that you want to keep him in jail?" And Father Benitez tells her, "He knows that I love him." The birds then head off to the funeral, which is very emotional for Ruth and 3. But the next day, they head to go meet with Omar. He tells them that he can't run the operation from in prison. The cell phone won't work because the guards check every single day. And Father Benitez isn't willing to bring one in. If this is going to work, they have to secure his power immediately. So Marty suggests that he go down to Mexico. At the end of the day, the FBI doesn't care who's running things, as long as they feel they have a controllable entity. And after what he did for the cartel with the Lagunas cartel, all he would really need is Omar's blessing. Omar thinks about it and says, "Yeah, this could work." He also warns Marty that it's not going to be easy because right now, he doesn't appear powerful to his people. In order to get that back, he needs Marty to go down there and tell his people that it was he who killed Javi. Not everybody's going to take this well, but delivering bad news is what Marty Byrde does best. The next day, Marty is scheduled to go to Mexico. And as Marty is preparing his things, Wendy is finally able to get Claire on the phone. Wendy starts trying to sell Claire on why the deal still works, why Claire needs her, but Claire no longer does, because Claire drove down to the Ozarks and reached an agreement with Ruth Langmore. It took a little bit of convincing, but it's going to make Ruth really rich. That night, Ruth sneaks into the Snell farm and grabs all the opium that Claire Shaw is going to need, which means Claire Shaw no longer needs the birds. Claire doesn't give Wendy an explanation either, just hanging up the phone on her. A little while later, Nelson comes and picks Marty up. Right before they leave, he asks Wendy, Hey, how did you know Omar wasn't going to kill you? I mean, that was a ballsy move. He told you he was going to kill you and you still got him out? You might make it out of this thing after all. And all of that is a complete surprise to Marty, who was told the meeting went well. Marty, being the quick thinker, tells Nelson that it was all Wendy's idea. She's a quick thinker and she's got good instincts. He then goes to get in the back seat, but there's another person there. It's the priest. He's going with him. They then drive off to Mexico. In episode 10, Marty heads down to Mexico with Nelson, who's going to protect him, and Father Benitez, who will give him legitimacy. After that, though, it's up to Marty. And that's going to be easier said than done. He's got to convince these lieutenants that he's not just some messenger boy, that he is to be respected. Basically, he's going to have to be Omar Navarro. As soon as he touches down, Marty calls Wendy to tell her that he's okay, and then he has to get ready to go address all of the cartel's men. They all gather in a large room, and Marty breaks the news that Javi is dead. Some of them think that it was the Laguna cartel again, but he says no. This was done by Omar. Omar gave the hit, because Javi was a traitor who was about to do a deal with the FBI. So Navarro is back in charge. He's going to run things for the time being through Marty, but the plan is to have Navarro switch to a lesser security prison, then extradited to Mexico where they can pay his way out of jail, and he can be back to running things. Right away, just like Omar predicted, there are some detractors. When a lieutenant named Cabrera asks, how exactly are you going to do that? Marty looks him dead in the eye and says, because I want it done. I wanted Omar to win the cartel war, and he won the cartel war. He then tells all of them that he needs to meet with them individually to discuss their business. So bring their books, bring their accountant, bring anything they need, but they have to go over their finances. As he's walking out, he gets stopped by Omar's sister, Javi's mother, Camilla. It's a little awkward because Marty just told everybody that her son was a rat and he's dead, but she understands that. She actually thought this day would come at some point. But the fact is, she's used to it. She lost her father and a husband to this lifestyle, so a son, it's nothing new. She wants to know from Marty, though, how exactly he plans on going about getting Omar back. More detailed. Marty explains that Omar is on something called an SDN list. It's a register of people and companies that the U.S. won't do business with. The first step is getting Omar off of that list, then getting Omar transferred, getting him extradited, and once he's in Mexico, it's going to be pretty easy to bribe somebody to break him out. Marty comes off confidently, and it's something that impresses Camilla. He then kicks back in Mexico and waits for the next day when he has to meet with all the lieutenants. But things aren't going great back home. Once Charlotte found out that her dad was going back to Mexico, she got really upset at Wendy for putting her dad in that risky situation. Because of that, she's not really on speaking terms with her at the moment. Wendy also figured out pretty easily why Claire Shaw no longer needs her. She goes and meets with Ruth and tries to convince Ruth that she hasn't really thought this through. If Claire likes the product so much, Ruth might have to go into this kind of lifestyle. So what Wendy proposes is Ruth partner with them one time, and then after that, she'll deal with Claire. She desperately needs Claire's donation for the foundation. Ruth would simply have to make it a stipulation in her deal with Claire. But Ruth is no longer trying to help out the birds. Even after Wendy tells her that it was Ruth who killed their chance on getting out of there, Ruth still is not interested in helping Wendy or Marty. So Wendy's going to have to go to plan B, the sheriff. But when she enters, she's surprised because it's not Sheriff Guerrero. It's a new guy named Deputy Wyckoff. He's the interim sheriff. He tells her that Sheriff Guerrero went back to Polk County. She just wasn't a great fit there. And Deputy Wyckoff seems extremely serious. He doesn't answer Wendy's questions as to why Sheriff Guerrero was lifted, if it was her decision or the department's. It causes Wendy to get straight to the point. She tells Deputy Wyckoff that Ruth Langmore is about to go back to the Snell farm and pick up a bunch of opium. So Wyckoff looks into it. He heads over to the Lazy O and starts questioning Sam, but Sam doesn't really know anything. And then he goes to question the Lazy O's accountant, which just happens to be Jonah. And when he finds out that the accountant is Wendy's son, that's a big surprise to him. He also knows that something is going on. Something's fishy. Jonah doesn't really want to answer any questions. But Darlene and Ruth and Wendy all being connected, and now you've got Jonah in the mix, something just doesn't add up. Deputy Wyckoff gets cut off, though, from his interrogation by Nathan, who sees that his grandson is being interrogated without an adult present, and he puts the kibosh on it right then and there. Because he's not getting any answers, Wyckoff just decides to put a tail on her. While Wyckoff has a man following Ruth, Wendy goes to try to see if she can save her foundation. She needs Jim's help. Problem is, Jim isn't answering her calls. So she goes and has a face-to-face with him at his house. He's not thrilled to see her, and he reiterates that he does not want anything to do with her, But Wendy Bird is very convincing. She explains that Javi is dead and their current plan is to get Omar extradited to the U.S., but what they need is the full power of their board of directors. If they put the pressure on the Treasury Department, they will be able to get Omar off the SDN list. He reminds her that no one on the board will be in line with this sort of thinking if donations aren't pouring in, and the fact that the Shaw deal is stalled is not going to help matters. She reassures him that she's working on it, but in the meantime, Jim can help her get some of those donations back. The foundation needs more donors, and he's a really good source with that kind of thing. She wants him to gather as many whales as possible to headline a fundraiser at the casino. He tells her, "I'm not back, but I'll make some calls." So at the moment, things are looking up for Wendy, but they're looking the exact opposite way for Ruth. Just like Wendy thought, Ruth heads to the Snell farm to pick up the opium. She rented a U-Haul truck, but she noticed that she was being followed. She thought it might be a coincidence, and when she gets to the farm, she sees the same car, so now she knows for certain she's being followed. She turns the U-Haul around and heads right to the sheriff's department, where she reams Wyckoff out. Wyckoff stands his ground, though, saying that he got a tip that Ruth is going to make a big mistake and she might be trying to take over the Darlene Snell opium supply line. And Ruth knows exactly who tipped him off. Ruth tells Wyckoff that he's being played by Wendy. That's all it is. She has no interest in taking over the opium supply, and that's it. But Ruth knows that yelling at the acting sheriff isn't going to work. He's not just going to tell his men to stand down. They're going to continue to follow her. She needs to get that opium to Claire, so her options are very limited. She heads to go visit with Frank Jr. She explains the situation to Frank and wants his help in getting the opium out. She'll lead the cops on a wild goose chase while he sneaks into the farm, grabs the opium, and delivers it to Claire. Because they now have such a good working relationship, he agrees. He's going to go pick up the opium the next day. And the next day is a busy one for Marty Bird. He starts meeting with the lieutenants and their accountants, going over the books and giving them tips on how they can increase their cash flow. But then he meets with that Lieutenant Cabrera, who gives him a lot of attitude. He doesn't appreciate the fact that Marty's poking around. And maybe that's because Marty finds discrepancies in his book. Somebody was skimming money off the top from the cartel. Cabrera right away blames his accountant and beats the crap out of him, even though the accountant claims it wasn't him. After this very uncomfortable meeting, he receives a phone call from Wendy, where his day is getting worse. Because in prison, Omar Navarro was attacked, stabbed multiple times in the back, but he was able to kill his assailant. The issue is he bled out so much that now he's in a coma. If he dies, this whole thing goes up in flames. She starts to wonder if they get Marty out of there, but he says no. That would be a sign of weakness. Whoever ordered the hit knows that it just happened, so they'll know why I'm fleeing. What we do is we don't let anyone know he's in a coma. What we do tell him is he killed his attacker, he's strong, and he's still giving the orders. When he hangs up the phone, Camilla comes outside and he runs into her, and she knows what happened. He tells her that he's gotten word from Omar to tell her not to worry. He's strong, he'll be fine. He then asks her what she knows about this Lieutenant Cabrera. He wants to find out who was behind the attack, and this is a guy who lied about his books. She tells Marty that Cabrera and Javi were friends, but Javi also told her that if he ever became head of the cartel, the first thing he would do is get rid of Cabrera. So that's what Marty does. He doesn't outright kill him. He starts off by torturing him, trying to get him to admit that it was he who ordered the hit on Navarro. Cabrera, though, is a tough cookie to crack. They start off by just beating the crap out of him, but he still doesn't admit that he was the one who did the hit. They decide then to just torture him with music and let him sit there, not sleeping for the night. The next day, Cabrera finally breaks. After water torture and music and beatings, he finally admits that it was he who was the one who put out the hit on Navarro. After that, it's just a formality. Cabrera's got to die. And within a few minutes, Cabrera's dead. Back up in the States, before Wendy's big foundation dinner, she heads to the church where Jonah is handing out missing posters for Ben. She didn't go there to help out, though. She needs to talk to Charlotte. Even though Charlotte's mad at her, she needs her help because she needs her at the foundation event that night. It's the Bird Family Foundation, and Wendy being alone isn't a great look. She needs some family there. Charlotte tells Wendy that she'll go. As Wendy's leaving, she runs into Ruth, who was invited to the event by Nathan. Ruth is disgusted to even see Wendy at the event. After all, Ruth knows that it was Wendy who was behind Ben's murder. But in a way, Ruth is happy to see Wendy, because she wanted to relay the message that the plan that Wendy hatched with the sheriff didn't work and the Shaw deal is done. But Wendy has no idea just how screwed she truly is by this deal getting done. When she shows up at the casino looking at the preparations for this dinner, Jim comes up and tells her that he told all of the board members that the dinner was canceled. And he did that because Shaw Medical is pulling their charitable contributions for the rehab facilities. They probably have one last chance to get Shaw back on board with this. So Wendy calls Claire up and leaves a voicemail telling her that if Wendy isn't happy, the people she works for are not happy. And Claire should know what that means. So Wendy is going to give Claire one more chance to fix all of this. As Wendy is trying to fix the situation with her foundation, Mel Saddam has been able to put the pieces together. With the help of a few sheriffs in different departments and surveillance video, he's been able to make it all the way to the diner where we last saw Ben. And for all you conspiracy theorists out there, we find out for sure Ben is dead. Nelson picked him up and shot him in the head. In episode 11, right before Marty leaves Mexico, he meets with Javi's lawyer, the same lawyer that tried to intimidate Claire Shaw, and he gives her some instructions on a shipment to New Orleans. He then gets approached by Camilla. She has a request before he leaves. She wants to see Omar. He tells her that it's going to be really difficult, but she says, well, not impossible, and you have your political connections, so try to work them for me. He doesn't really have a choice but to agree. She walks away, but she walks up to Javi's lawyer and says something. Now, it's out of earshot, and Marty can't see it, but he does think that's weird. A few hours later, Marty arrives back at home. He sits down for a dinner with both Charlotte and Wendy, but no Jonah. Jonah's still too upset to come by the house. They then start to ask Marty how was it down in Mexico, and he explains that he spent most of the time looking at everybody's books. It's kind of boring. He never once brings up the murder. Charlotte then switches the conversation because Ruth called her, telling her that she's had a change of heart. She wants a meeting at the casino the next morning. Wendy has no interest in meeting with Ruth, but Charlotte tells her, she said you'd both want to be there? It's about the foundation. Wendy decides to go along with this meeting because she met with Schaefer and that didn't go well. He wants his money. So any kind of news about the foundation, she needs to take a meeting on. She needs to dig herself out of this hole that she's in. But she also got some very interesting news from Schaefer in this meeting. He told her that getting Omar off that list is becoming difficult because somebody in Mexico is lobbying to keep him on it. So at dinner, she asked Marty, did you hear any rumblings about that when you were down there? And that's when he realizes that it was right in front of his face the whole time. He just didn't realize it. It was Camilla. She was the only person that he told about the SDN list. She's close with Javi's lawyer. It's been her the entire time. Marty gets really upset when he realizes that he killed an innocent man. Because it also must have been Camilla who ordered the hit on her brother. She said it herself. She grew up in this lifestyle. She lost a father, she lost a husband, now she's lost a son. But if she can get revenge on the man who killed her son, i.e. Omar, she's going to do that. Marty is shell-shocked that he didn't see this before. Wendy tries to make him feel better, telling him that it wasn't him. He didn't do it. It wasn't intentional. And that their focus right now should be getting the funding for the foundation and getting Navarro off that list, just moving forward. Marty heads to bed, and since Jonah didn't show up at dinner, the next day he heads to the Lazy O to check in on him. He doesn't find Jonah in his room because Jonah was hanging out with Nathan. Just like Wendy predicted, the Nathan that Jonah is seeing is completely different from the Nathan that she grew up with. Marty really just wanted to check up on his kid and tell him that he loved him and he missed him. And Jonah does miss Marty, but he also doesn't want to be anywhere near his mother. He then has to head off to the meeting with Ruth at the casino. He's there and Wendy's there, but there's no Ruth. She's running late. And then she walks in with Rachel. Ruth was able to track down Rachel in Miami, working as an interior decorator. And when she walks in the door, it's really surprising to the birds. Marty starts to catch up with her, see how she's doing, but Wendy speeds the meeting along. Ruth tells both of them, I want to buy you out of this place. I want the bell. To which Wendy starts laughing because she knows that they're not going to put Ruth on the license. The Gaming Commission won't allow it. She has a record. And that's exactly why Ruth went and found Rachel. Rachel doesn't have a record. So Ruth's plan is to buy the birds out, take over the casino, put everything in Rachel's name, but she'll actually be running it. It's a great deal for Rachel because she doesn't have to do anything. And with the birds trying to leave town, it'll give Ruth a purpose. While Wendy has no interest in selling the bell, Marty takes a more level-headed approach, explaining to Ruth that they're not going to sell their entire share, especially with what they do there. What they could offer is selling 10%, her name doesn't go on the license, and all of it is under the table. Ruth shakes her head, saying no chance, and her counter is 85%. She'll run the day-to-day, and Rachel's name is on everything. Wendy turns her attention to Rachel and says, what did she tell you to go along with this scheme? Because I'm willing to bet that Ruth left a few things out. Like, did she tell you that the money came from selling Darlene's heroin? And in fact, yes, she did tell Rachel that, but she also told Rachel that she's done with that lifestyle now. She wants to become more legitimate, which is why she's approaching the Byrdes about buying the Bell. Wendy asks her, did she tell you that she killed a man who was running a cartel and that there's a chance they might be after her? That part Ruth left out. Wendy tells Rachel that this whole thing isn't about business. It's simply punishment. Ruth is trying to get revenge for what happened to Wyatt and for what happened to Ben. And there's no deal that's going to go down. The Byrdes walk away, and Marty can't believe that Wendy wouldn't even consider it. Schaefer's people want their money. Well, this is a chance to get them their money. And Marty thinks he can talk her down to 25%, and they still continue to be in control. But Wendy is not about to give her casino up to Ruth Langmore. She also thinks that she can get Claire Shaw back. There's one chip she hasn't played, and that's the fact that Claire promised Javi's mother stock in the company. Marty tries to remind his wife that Javi's mother just tried to kill Omar, and that once he finds out, she's not going to be around to collect those stock options. But Wendy tells Marty we can turn her into Omar whenever we want. And Marty thinks that is way too risky. But Wendy seems to be calling the shots in this. They then head their separate ways. There was also a contentious conversation between Ruth and Rachel when they got out, because what Wendy said is true. Rachel didn't know most of that. After a little bit of back and forth, Rachel just tells Ruth, I can't do this, and walks off. Ruth heads home, frustrated, where she's greeted by Mel Saddam. She definitely doesn't want to talk to him, but she is willing to give him 5 minutes after he tells her that it's about Ben. Mel shows Ruth all of the evidence he's been able to collect, all of the photos from different security camera footage that shows Wendy with Ben. He came to Ruth because he knows that Ruth and the Byrdes have been close, and he thinks that maybe Ruth might know something, and she's just trying to cover for the Byrdes. While Mel couldn't be more wrong about this, Ruth also keeps her mouth shut, just saying she doesn't know anything. All she knows is one day Ben picked up her calls, and the next day he didn't. There's then a knock at the door, and it's Jonah Byrde, which ends the conversation between Ruth and Mel. Mel takes off, and Jonah asks Ruth, did you tell him anything? And she says no. And Jonah says, well, just don't say anything to my grandpa. It'd kill him. Back over at the Byrde residence, Marty and Wendy are kind of just lounging, enjoying some wine, when Marty gets a phone call from Agent Clay. Omar has woken up, and he wants to see Marty. But she then asks him, how did Omar's lieutenants handle it when you came down there and started pushing them around? And Marty tells her they handled it well. So she proposes the idea that if Omar doesn't make a full recovery, maybe they just make Marty being the head of the cartel a permanent position. Marty tells her that Omar will make a full recovery, and he quickly gets off the phone. Marty turns to Wendy and gives her the update, but also says, we have to tell him about Camilla. And Wendy is totally against that. Marty tells Wendy, we can't hide this, and we have no idea what she's planning. But Wendy shoots back, well, we don't know what he's going to do. Telling him this will make him desperate and paranoid. He needs to believe that we're still up to the task, and the idea that we killed the wrong guy doesn't present that. So Marty does what he's told. He heads to go meet with Navarro, never once bringing up the fact that Marty's convinced Camilla was the one who put the hit out on him. The only question that Omar has is, when Marty found out that it was Cabrera who betrayed him, did he hesitate to act? And Marty says no. Omar smirks and says, then you played my part well. When Marty gets home from his visit with Omar, he's surprised because Nelson is standing at his house. And seeing Nelson is never a good sign. Nelson's not there to kill him, though. He just tells him, you have a visitor. And Marty is stunned to walk into his living room and see Camilla chatting it up with Wendy. Wendy tells Marty that she reached out to Camilla, and they both are going to join Marty in Chicago the next day. She's going to take Camilla to meet Claire and talk about those stock options. Camilla thanks them both and then asks Marty, is there any chance I can go see my brother? Marty tells her not at the moment, but he will keep trying, which is all a lie. When Camilla leaves, Marty is at a loss for words that Wendy actually called Camilla up and invited her there. But as Wendy puts it, it's the smartest play. When Marty reminds her that Camilla wants to kill Omar, Wendy tells Marty no. She's going to help us get Claire back. And if she gets them Claire, it can fund the foundation for years. They start arguing back and forth about whether or not they can trust her. And Wendy says, I'm not planning on trusting her. I'm going to use her. Marty heads to the Byrde Foundation, but as he's leaving, he gets a phone call from Rachel, who is pissed off. While she was in town, she decided to go visit her old buddy Tuck, only to find that Tuck isn't doing so well. He's fine health-wise, but he's out of a job. The new owner of the Blue Cat lost a lot of business when the casino opened and he stopped scheduling Tuck. When she asked Tuck if he reached out to Marty, he said, "No, I don't want to bother him." But her and Marty had an agreement when she left town that Marty would look after Tuck, and he didn't hold his end of the agreement. And the fact that Tuck is just sitting at home doing nothing really infuriates Rachel. So she calls Marty up, yells at him, saying that he's selfish, and then hangs up on him when he tries to apologize. After getting yelled at by Rachel, he then has the privilege of getting yelled at by Agent Clay, because that shipment that Marty okayed down in Mexico was supposed to be seized by the U.S. government, but when they went to go do it, it was empty. Clay is pissed off because it looks like she's got egg on her face. The FBI was planning on getting a big seizure, and they came up short. While Marty knows he got screwed, he saves face by telling her that it was all planned. He made the call, and this was nothing more than him trying to curry favor with the members of the cartel. In reality, though, he knows he got screwed over, and he figures that it must have been Camilla because he saw Camilla talking to the lawyer. While Marty was realizing just how much of a snake Camilla is, Wendy was trying to set up a meeting with Camilla and Claire. Claire isn't returning her phone calls, so Wendy has to go find her outside of Shaw Medical walking in. Claire explains, "We're not in business anymore." And Wendy laughs and says, "We're not, but you and Javi are. You promised his mother stock options, and this is the sister of a drug cartel leader. Do you really want to not do that meeting?" It scares Claire enough to schedule it for 1 p.m. She hands over the stock option agreement, but to her surprise, Camilla says, "What about our other deal? The one my son offered you?" Wendy cuts in and says, "That was in addition to a $150 million donation for the Bird Foundation." And Camilla says, "Yeah, of course." Claire tries to walk it back, saying there was no paperwork, but it really doesn't take much to intimidate her and make her cave on this. When Wendy and Camilla walk out of there, Claire Shaw is back in business with the Navarro cartel and the Bird Foundation. Wendy and Marty then link up, and as Camilla is getting coffee, Marty fills Wendy in on the seizure. He tells her, "We got to get Camilla out of the picture." And when Wendy tells him it's complicated, he says, "No, it's not complicated at all. We tell Navarro the truth, he takes care of the rest." That's when Wendy tells Marty that she promised Camilla she would take her to see him. And Marty cannot believe that his wife is this stupid. Camilla is to go visit her brother the next day, and the Birds head back to the Ozarks. But down in the Ozarks, they have issues. After what happened with Tuck, Rachel gets so infuriated that she goes back to Ruth and says, "Deal's back on." They start chit-chatting a little bit, and that's when Rachel realizes they might not even need the Birds. Because Wyatt married Darlene, and Ruth was Wyatt's caretaker. Darlene having a large stake in the casino, that might be Ruth's. They go and talk to a lawyer, and the lawyer confirms it, but there is an issue. Getting Ruth's name on that casino license is not going to be easy. They need a friend in a high place. They go and talk to Jonah and ask him if he knows who his parents were talking to when they tried to lobby for the casino. And he tells them about Charles Wilkes. He's able to get them a meeting using the name Mike Fleming. When they arrive, at first, Wilkes brushes them aside, but after he hears that Ruth is poised to become the largest landowner in the Ozarks, and possibly the largest stake of the Missouri Belle, he ends up letting them in. But that's only the first issue the Birds have when they arrive home. They're greeted by Mel Saddam and Nathan. Mel presents all of the evidence showing that Wendy was lying. But instead of talking to Mel, she asks to talk to her father alone. Nathan now believes that his daughter was lying the entire time and his son isn't missing. Wendy doesn't discourage that line of thinking, just saying that she was protecting Ben. When Nathan tells her that Mel was able to figure out that she left Ben in a diner in Kentucky, Wendy lies some more, saying that they got in a fight, he told her to leave, and she waited on the side of the road for hours waiting for him to call, but he never did. At the end of the day, she doesn't think he wants to be found. Nathan and Wendy get into a huge fight, with Nathan feeling like everything that's happened to Ben is Wendy's fault. Nathan is so mad when he gets back to the Lazy O that he tells his girlfriend he wants to pray alone, and then he just starts hitting the bottle hard. But as Nathan and Wendy were talking, outside, Marty and Charlotte are chatting it up about Chicago, but that leads into a conversation about the relationship between Wendy and Marty, because it's not great at the moment. Marty admits to Charlotte that he doesn't mind allowing Wendy to be in the driver's seat, but at the moment, he feels like she's steering them right off a cliff. He also feels like he can't win no matter what he does. He's got a lot of anger inside him, and it's boiling up. The next day, the Birds escort Camilla to go visit Omar. You would never know between the two interacting that Camilla was the one who put the hit on Omar. As the two are talking, Wendy steps in and says, "Hey, Omar, what would you think about Camilla taking Marty's place as your emissary in Mexico? The thing is, we need Marty here to help you get off the SDN list." Camilla knows the business. She can travel freely. It just makes sense. None of this, by the way, was run by Marty at all. And to Marty's dismay, Omar ends up agreeing to it. When they get out of there, they hit bad traffic. Marty is frustrated. And quite frankly, he doesn't want to listen to any explanation that Wendy has to give him. Wendy starts describing why this move works, and Marty keeps turning up the radio. But the more that Wendy talks, the more he's getting frustrated. On top of it, he's got a driver behind him who's honking, and he has nowhere to go. There's road construction. There's a car in front of him. He can't turn. So finally, he gets out of his car and demands the other guy get out. This leads to a full-on brawl between Marty, Wendy, and this random driver. While Marty was fighting with Wendy, he didn't take kindly to the fact that the guy called Wendy a bitch. Marty absolutely snaps on this guy, punching him in the face repeatedly until finally he just walks off. In episode 12, the birds both get arrested for trying to fight some rando on the side of the road. They have to get bailed out by Jonah and Charlotte. Even though they spent time in jail together, Marty is still pissed off at Wendy. He tells her, I don't understand how I'm supposed to funnel shipments to the FBI with Camilla running things. It's not sustainable. Wendy wants to keep Camilla close, while Marty wants to tell Omar exactly what she did so that Omar can get rid of her. Marty then apologizes for what he did to that guy on the road, saying, I don't know what that was. And Wendy tells him, I know what it was. I know I'm not easy to love. And when we're out of this, if you want to leave, you can. She doesn't say it in a confrontational way, and Marty doesn't answer, just walking off. As Marty and Wendy were busy getting arrested, Ruth was busy conniving against them. She meets with Charles Wilkes to talk about how she can go about getting either her name or Rachel's name on the license. And the idea they come up with is just trying to get Ruth's record expunged. She was a minor when all those crimes went down, and Charles has a powerful judge as a friend. It's not a done deal. Ruth is going to have to meet with this judge and really kiss her ass, showing that she's a different person than what her rap sheet says. But if everything goes well, Ruth's record will be clean and you can easily get her name on the gaming license. When that happens, Charles will sell her his stake of the Missouri Belle and she will have majority ownership. Ruth and Charles were not the only ones conniving against the birds, though. So is Nathan. He had a meeting with Mel where Mel told him, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to find your son because I think your son's dead. After talking with Maya, she was able to identify the man in the pictures as Nelson, a hitman for the Navarro cartel. It doesn't take Columbo to figure out what happened to Ben. Mel also tells Nathan that Wendy and Marty were investigated by the FBI. This plants the seed in Nathan's head that they must have had something to do with it. Because of that, he wants payback. So he asks Charlotte and Jonah if they want to come live with him, all the way out in North Carolina. If they do, he'll draft up the paperwork and they'll go to family court over it. The children end up telling their grandfather they do, in fact, want to go live with him. You can't blame them. Their parents are mixed up with the Navarro cartel. They could be dead any moment. So Nathan goes to the birdhouse to try to get Wendy to just sign them over, but she doesn't. She tries to slam the door in his face, telling him that those kids are never going to go with him. So he presents her with the documents for family court, saying he'll see her in court within 3 days. Since both Marty and Wendy can't go talk to Jonah about the situation, they go and talk to Charlotte. Charlotte tells her parents that she didn't know her grandfather was going to take them to family court. But she does admit that she did say they would go with their grandfather. When Marty asks Charlotte, do you want to go with him? Charlotte tells her parents, Grandpa knows things, and he's not going to go away. How are we supposed to protect you guys if we don't go with him? And Wendy tells her, I'll worry about your grandfather. That night, Marty and Wendy discuss it further, and they know they're in a tough spot because Nathan has a massive trump card. It's Mel. Mel's planning to testify at the hearing in 3 days. But Wendy cannot let her kids go with her father. After all, she hates the guy. So they start thinking of an idea of making sure Mel doesn't make it to court. The idea they come up with is getting him reinstated to the Chicago PD, and Schaefer can help them do that. Schaefer smells something funny, though. He knows that if you're trying to help out a PI become a detective, something must not be going right for you. The birds reassure him that everything's okay, but he still doesn't buy it. If they want something from him, he wants something from them in return. Either more money, which they can't give him and he knows that, or his rigged voting booths in key states. There is a line, though, that Wendy is not willing to cross, and that is it. So Schaefer tells her it's one or the other. Either you want this guy reinstated or you want Omar off the list, but pick. So they're going to have Schaefer get Mel his job back. But if they do that, they need somebody else to get Omar off the SDN list. They call up Jim, and Jim tells them that's not going to be easy. He tells them that he'll come up with a list, but it's going to take some time to get everybody on board. So Omar's going to have to sit tight, and that's not going to be easy because Omar is still sitting in jail and he wants to get the hell out. The next stop they have to make is to go meet with the police chief in Chicago, a meeting that Schaefer set up. He tells the Birds that he did look into Mel, and Mel was a good detective until he had that little drug snafu. He's willing to reinstate him, but what he wants in return is a boat and a large donation to the police union. When they leave that meeting, Mel Saddam has been reinstated as a Chicago police detective. The next day, they call a meeting with Mel in a diner and give him the good news. And while Mel has thought about becoming a detective again for the last 4 years, he hates how it happened. He's conflicted as to whether to take the job or not. He knows that this is just a ploy by the Birds to keep him off the stand. But at the end of the day, he becomes what he's wanted to become since he got fired from the force. He's so torn up about what to do that he calls up his sponsor. The thing is, no matter if it's his sponsor or Maya, nobody can answer this question but Mel. So he has some things to think about. As he's pondering a big life choice, Ruth goes and meets with that judge. She all but aces the initial meeting, but the judge does tell her, I'm going to comb over your record, every single thing you've done, and then I'm going to check up on you at home. She does that, and she promises the judge, if you clean up my record, you will not regret it. I'm not going to screw up a second chance. With Charles Wilkes vouching for her, for the first time since birth, Ruth Langmore is completely clean. But she has another issue to deal with. Deputy Wyckoff stops by her house and tells her, we arrested somebody for Wyatt's murder. It's a guy who stole Wyatt's guitar and pawned it. He also pawned a bunch of Darlene's jewelry. They figured Darlene caught him, things got testy, and he killed them both. Normally, this would be great news. The issue is that Ruth knows that this poor guy didn't do it. He's just some junkie who is going to be blamed for it. So both Ruth and Mel are at a crossroads on what to do. Ruth heads to the Lazy O, where they're having a baptism. Nathan and his group are baptizing Sam into their congregation. Ruth makes the joke that they should probably charge more for that, but she hasn't stopped there to find God. She stopped there because she decided to bring Jonah Ben's ashes. Since Jonah's going to be heading to North Carolina, she figured that he would want them. So she brought the goat cookie jar. He offers to divvy it up, but she doesn't want to divvy up somebody's ashes like a bag of sugar. So she just gives them to him. Jonah asks her if she's coming to the court tomorrow, and she says, yeah, of course I'll be there. She then gives him the good news that she no longer has a record. He asks how it happened, and she tells him, Wilkes put in a good word for me. She then heads off and leaves Ben behind. While Jonah was getting Ben's ashes, the Birds went to go meet with Omar. They have a lot on their plate. In 24 hours, they're supposed to meet at family court with Nathan, and they don't know if Mel is going to take their deal. They also have the issue of Omar to deal with. He's getting extremely impatient, and they know it's going to take at least a couple months for Jim to get that list together. On top of it, every meeting they have with Omar, Camilla is right by his side. When they arrive at the prison, the first thing he asks about is what's going on with the SDN list. And they lie to him, telling him it's in motion, but he's had his people look into it, and he knows that the motion hasn't even been filed yet. Omar doesn't think they're laundering enough money, and he doesn't think they're acting quick enough. On top of it, the woman that they know ordered a hit on him is sitting next to him, egging him on. While working on the SDN list is going to be difficult, they can launder more money. After all, they do have the Missouri Bell. So they reassure Omar that that shouldn't be an issue. As for the SDN list, he gives them an ultimatum that they need to get it done within days, not months. They tell him what he wants to hear and they leave, but they're very frustrated. They know that the extra money that they're supposed to launder is so that Camilla can buy loyalty with the lieutenants so she can take it over. They also know it's going to be virtually impossible to get him off that list within days. The Birds don't have many options. They're in between a rock and a hard place, and this leads Wendy to call up Schaefer and tell him, I can get those voting boxes in the States. At the end of the day, it was her moral compass versus her own life. The next day, the Birds have to get ready to head to family court. The good thing for the Birds is Mel is nowhere to be found. He decided, after discussing it with Maya and his sponsor, he has to take the job in Chicago. He checks out of the Lazy O, but does notice on the way out Ruth's goat cookie jar. He always inquired about it when he stopped by Ruth's house, and she always said that there were no cookies in it. He just thought it was odd that it showed up at the Lazy O. But he's heading back to Chicago, which means he's not going to be able to help Nathan out. It looks like it's going to be a win for the Birds, but there is a motion on the judge's desk, and what she rules is Jonah and Charlotte are old enough to make their own decision on the matter. And when they get out of court, Charlotte and Jonah tell their parents, we're going with Grandpa. Right away, Marty and Wendy beg their children not to do this, but it seems like Charlotte and Jonah's minds are made up. Charlotte and Jonah start telling their parents why exactly they're going with their grandfather, and the most of it has to do with Wendy. They feel like Wendy puts them in danger and she doesn't listen to anybody but herself. She's just downright selfish. They also feel like their father is nothing more than their mother's puppet. As Marty is trying to talk his kids down from this, Wendy goes and begs her father not to do this, but he doesn't take her begging, he doesn't take her apologies, he's just planning on taking her kids. Marty has to grab Wendy, take her to the car, and Wendy ends up bashing her head against the window and cutting it pretty good. In episode 13, Wendy tries to check herself into the mental institution that she checked Ben into. She thinks that maybe being in there will help keep Jonah and Charlotte close. But when she gets there, the guy tells her that there's just not enough beds. He gives her a list of shrinks that can help her out, but she doesn't need that. She storms out. Marty's not having much of a better day. When he gets to the Missouri Belle, he finds that there's a hostile takeover going on with Ruth and Rachel. With Ruth's record clean, she was able to secure the majority stake in the Missouri Belle. She met with contractors early in the morning to start building her dream house that her and Wyatt talked about years ago. And then she heads over to the Missouri Belle to start dealing with all the paperwork. Marty's very confused as to how this took place, and Ruth is more than happy to fill him in on how she became the boss. But he explains to her that the controlling interest of the casino needs to belong to him so that he can launder money for the Navarro cartel. That's the whole reason why the casino was even built in the first place. The stunt that she's pulling could end up getting him or her killed for that matter. And Ruth chuckles at that and says they're not going to kill you if they haven't done it by now. Marty once again reiterates that this casino is part of a big operation and that it belongs to a drug cartel, but in Ruth's opinion, that's no longer her problem. At the end of the day, the controlling interest of the casino is hers and hers alone. So Marty's going to have to find another way to launder money. It's just that simple. Marty calls Wendy up to give her the bad news, and she takes it about as good as you would expect. She does tell Marty that he's going to have to head to the meeting with Navarro that day by himself. She's got something going on for the gala. The first question that he has is, why have the lieutenants not received the extra money that Marty was supposed to be laundering? Marty doesn't want to reveal to Omar that Ruth took over the casino, so he tells him that he's been dealing with a family emergency and how his father-in-law has been trying to take the kids. While Camilla feels for Marty in that situation, Omar doesn't. He doesn't care. He just wants out. Marty tries to pitch Omar on using the farm and the Big Muddy as ways they can launder the money, but Omar is steadfast that they are to use the Missouri Belle. Marty doesn't want to lie to Omar, but he also doesn't want to get himself killed. So he tells him that it won't be a problem as he tries to figure out what he's going to do. While Marty was meeting with Omar, Wendy was heading to Buddy's mausoleum to grab some more money when she gets a phone call from Jim with surprisingly great news. And boy, did Wendy need this. The rescheduled gala is getting some big fish RSVPing. So much so that another gala canceled their silent auction because they were getting too many regretfully declines. Jim reminds Wendy that if they can pull this off and get this fiscal goal, and this particular group of people get along, then it's game over. The Birds own the Midwest. Wendy is so excited hearing this. She then grabs $2 million and heads over to the Lazy O. Jonah sees his mom pull up, but Wendy doesn't go to Jonah's room. She goes to Nathan's. She tries to pay Nathan off with the $2 million to just get on the highway and leave without the kids. But Nathan says no. Even after Wendy pitches the fact that that $2 million can go a long way with his church and the congregation, for Nathan, it's not about the money. It's about protecting his grandchildren. Now that Wendy knows her dad isn't going to take the money, she starts reminding her dad what a horrible husband and father he was before she takes off. Wendy then heads home and meets up with Marty that night. While Wendy had a so-so day, Marty had a really bad day. After the meeting with Omar, he headed back to the Missouri Belle to try to pitch Ruth on just giving him a sunset period to launder this money. But she wasn't about it. She actually wants to do this thing the right way, the clean way, and she's not going to let Marty and Wendy ruin that for her. He doesn't quite know what to do. Wendy has an idea of just sending a bunch of people in there to launder it, pretending to be gamblers. Marty's suggestion is they just launder the money at the gala. They're going to have all of these big whales donating money, bidding on silent auctions. It's really the best chance they have. But Wendy doesn't want to do that. She doesn't want a chance that the IRS or the FBI investigate the Bird Foundation and find this. If they did, it would all be over. She knows how important image is in that world. Right now, her image is great. She doesn't want to risk losing that. She then turns her attention to the matter of Jonah and Charlotte and says to Marty, you've got to get those kids home, because if you don't do it, I'm going to do it. So the next day, he heads to the Lazy O and has a conversation with Jonah and Charlotte, begging them to come back. Jonah and Charlotte are worried that Marty is just a puppet for their mom, though, and their mom is the big issue. So they're not exactly inclined to take him up on the offer. But as Marty is trying to pitch the kids on staying, Wendy heads to the Missouri Belle to see how the gala setup is going, because even though Ruth still has a controlling interest in the Belle, she is still planning on putting on the gala. That's just good business. And while Wendy is overseeing everything, she runs into Rachel and tells Rachel this place was built for one reason and one reason only, and that is to launder money for Omar Navarro. That makes what you're doing inherently dangerous. I mean, you just got your life together. I don't see this going very well for you. Rachel chuckles at that and tells Wendy, other than this gala, I have no use for you. I mean, I think you are a ruthless, nasty bitch. I think you have no sense of humor or human decency. She then walks off, and the only thing she said that Wendy has a problem with is the lack of sense of humor. But in 4 seasons, you have to agree with Rachel on that one. Wendy now needs to send a message to Rachel, but she does it using Nelson. She just wants to scare Rachel. So she has Nelson break into Rachel's back seat and wait for Rachel to come out. He then puts a gun to Rachel's head and tells her she's playing a dangerous game. The first thing Rachel does the next day when she sees Marty is storm up to him and say, are you kidding me? You sent an assassin after me? Marty, though, has no idea what she's talking about because Marty had no idea that Wendy did it. And Rachel knows that if Marty didn't do it, then Wendy must have. Rachel gives Marty the same message that Ruth did, that Marty and Wendy can launder their money about 100 different ways than using the Missouri Belle, and they should do that. The more that Rachel talks to Marty about the situation, the more she realizes that all of this is Wendy. Marty doesn't care about the situation. He doesn't give a rat's ass about the gala. And Rachel kind of smirks and just tells him, I hope she's worth it. Marty does apologize to Rachel, saying that what his wife did was completely unacceptable, but he needs Rachel's help to get to Ruth. It's the last time he's ever going to ask her for anything. But this is about life and death. Rachel ends up telling Marty, okay. As Marty's leaving, he runs into Ruth, who is as confrontational to him as Rachel was just a few minutes ago. Marty tells Ruth that he had nothing to do with what happened to Rachel. It was all Wendy, and he's going to talk to her about it. But after that little stunt, Ruth got so mad that she tells Marty, I rerouted all the funds coming out of the Belle to legitimate bank accounts. Marty shakes his head and tells Ruth, as soon as this hits Mexico, they're going to come for you. And she says, not if you do your job. Find another way to clean the money. But Marty tries to explain that without her help, he can't do that as fast as he needs to. And Ruth just doesn't care. When Marty gets home, he asks Wendy, did you send Nelson after Rachel? And Wendy excitedly says, yeah, I did. Hope it worked. But Marty says, no, it didn't work. Ruth rerouted the casino's outgoing funds. She thinks that we have another way of doing this. And we don't. He reminds her that if they get Navarro off the list, it's useless if they don't have the money. And that's when Wendy reminds Marty that the FBI said if Omar died, they'd be happy to have him run the cartel. She says to Marty, the FBI has already given us the answer. We don't need Navarro. We just give Camilla the whole thing. We tell her everything. Marty thinks this is nuts and that Camilla will end up killing them. But Wendy tells him we make her an offer that's too good of a deal to turn down. Wendy paints the picture that everyone's going to assume that Navarro is running things through Camilla. But in reality, Navarro's dead and Camilla is the head of the cartel. It makes sense. After all the FBI wants is the money for the seizures. And the best part is, Wendy is convinced she can get Camilla on board. So that night, they call a meeting with Camilla and they tell her everything. But Camilla knows that if she's going to run the cartel with the FBI's blessing, this also allows the Birds to play kingmaker with their foundation. So while the Birds try to spin this, that this is good for Camilla, she also knows that this is really good for the Birds. Wendy doesn't deny that, saying that, yeah, they can both have this. Camilla starts talking about family and how the Birds are asking her to kill her own brother. And that's when Wendy says, Camilla, we know. We know you were the one who put the hit on your brother. And keep in mind, we never told him, and we never will. That's because we want to keep you alive. Camilla asks them, what makes you think that I won't kill you now that I know everything? And Marty tells her, because with us, you get the FBI. You'll get to run the cartel, and you'll never be on any most wanted list. Camilla thinks about it and agrees. And the Birds are going to set up a meeting with the FBI and Camilla to go over everything. Camilla has one last request, though. She wants to see Omar. And even though the Birds don't want that, she's insistent. Before the Birds take Camilla to see her brother, or before the meeting with Camilla and the FBI, the next day Wendy meets with Jim to go over Schaefer and the board seats of the Bird Foundation. Because without Navarro, they no longer need Schaefer's pull. Jim tells her that he can fill the board seat quick, and as far as damage control of Schaefer being off the board, it could actually turn to be a positive for the Bird Foundation because it would be the Birds saying that they don't want to get into bed with immoral people who are willing to rig elections. Wendy tells him to put a potential list together, and then she gets ready to go escort Camilla to visit Omar. During the meeting with Omar and Camilla, Omar can tell that Camilla is up to something. She starts talking about the past, and that's just fishy to him. It's at that moment that he figures she probably put the hit out on him, so he sets the record straight by saying, "Camilla, I did not kill Javi." When Camilla asks Omar, then who did, Omar says, "I don't know." She then asks him, "Well, who told you Javi died?" And Omar says, "Wendy Bird." As soon as Camilla gets out of the prison, she calls up Marty and asks, "Who killed my son?" Because I just got out with Omar and he says he didn't do it. Marty immediately plays dumb, saying he doesn't know, but he'll look into it and try to find out who did. But as Marty was talking to Camilla, Wendy got approached by Father Benitez because Omar wants to talk to her. She then starts talking about her relationship with her father to the priest, and the priest can commiserate because he didn't have a good relationship with his father either. But that's when she hatches an idea. She heads back to the mental institution and tells the person behind the desk that if they don't admit her, she's going to end up killing her father. It's a really good way to get admitted, and it works. She gets a bed. Marty shows up a little while later and asks Wendy, "What are you doing in here?" And she tells him that the whole reason she's in there is to worry the kids. Worry them enough so they don't go to North Carolina. So Marty has to tell the kids. She also tells Marty that she's not leaving there until Jonah and Charlotte are back. So for the time being, it's Marty and Marty alone. It's a pretty crazy day, but it doesn't even compare to the day that Ruth had. They started breaking ground on her brand new house, but she didn't even really have time to enjoy it. Because as she's driving home, she notices that she's being tailed by somebody. She starts getting kind of scared, so she heads to the sheriff's office. And that's where she tells Wyckoff everything. The truth about who killed Wyatt, what happened to that guy, and why the guy in jail is innocent. And the thing is, Ruth knows that the story is so crazy that if Wyckoff tells anybody else, no one's going to believe him. She never once mentions to Wyckoff that she's being followed. And when she gets out of the sheriff's department, she sees that the car is gone. She figured the whole time that it must have been Nelson, and she starts panicking. She calls up Rachel, who is staying in her trailer, and warns her, "This guy is coming for you. You have to be ready." Rachel starts freaking out, but she grabs a rifle and heads to the top of the trailer and waits for Nelson to arrive. A few seconds later, he does. He gets out of the car, and just like Ruth told her, she shoots him, dead. Now, Rachel and Ruth have to get rid of that body. And in the series finale, Ruth took care of Nelson's body. She buried it in what is supposed to be her swimming pool. As she's just finishing up, the cement truck arrives, but so does Marty Bird. She is absolutely covered in dirt, filthy, and the last person she wants to see is Marty Bird. But Marty came there, hat in hand, hoping that Ruth can help him get Charlotte and Jonah to come home. While Ruth doesn't really want to help Marty out, Marty plays the ultimate trump card. That Javi's mom wants answers as to who actually killed him, and if Ruth doesn't help out Marty, he's going to tell her. That kind of forces Ruth's hand. Plus, after a run-in she had with Nathan, she doesn't really like him. Nathan was extremely rude to her and treated her like trash. Like Ben, of all people, was too good for her. So screwing him over would be a little bit of a bonus. While Ruth decides just how she's going to handle this, Marty then has to race home because he has a meeting with Camilla. He doesn't tell Camilla exactly where Wendy is, just saying that she's out doing some other work. He gives Camilla some bank information she's going to need and also gives her an update on what's going to happen with Omar. He's going to be transferred with absolutely no warning. He doesn't come right out and say it, but the plan is going to be to make it look like Omar planned an escape and he was killed in the process. Camilla looks at Marty and says, "I'm not agreeing to anything until I hear this from the FBI. Marty finds it ironic because that's exactly what Omar said. She then starts asking questions about the day that Javi died. And Marty lies to her, just telling her that it was a normal day and he has no idea what happened. This is obviously a topic that Camilla is not going to let go. While Marty and Camilla were meeting, Ruth devised a plan on how to get Charlotte and Jonah to stay. But the first place that Ruth heads isn't to go meet with Jonah and Charlotte. The first place she heads is to go meet with Wendy. She wants assurances from Wendy because it's become clear to everybody involved that Wendy is actually the boss in all of this. Even though Marty said that this was his idea, she tells Wendy, I need assurances that if I get them to stay, you'll hold up your end of the agreement, and that's enough. I can get them to stay. I can't keep them here. That's on you. After Ruth gets such assurances, she heads over to the Lazy O. The first thing she does is pull out a gun from the safe, and then she heads to Nathan's room. She offers to have a drink with him since he's leaving the next day, and they start chatting up about Ben, the relationship. But the conversation turns contentious when Ruth looks at him and says, you don't even want them, do you? Nathan tries to kick her out, and she says, I'll leave if you tell me why you went to court for kids you don't even want. And the answer he gives is to screw over Wendy. In Nathan's eyes, she was a complete embarrassment to the family. That's when Ruth pulls out the gun, looking at Nathan and saying, you're going to tell Jonah and Charlotte that they can't come with you. When Nathan says that's not going to happen, Ruth fires off a shot. Ruth knows that Jonah and Charlotte are going to be running in there at any moment. So she says to Nathan, I want you to tell them exactly what you just told me before I shoot you in your head, the little one. And just as Ruth predicted, in bust Jonah and Charlotte, who are very confused at the sight they see. With no real choice, Nathan admits that he never wanted them. And a little while later, Jonah and Charlotte head to the mental institution to check up on their mom. She apologizes to both of them for everything that happened to Ben and everything that's happened to them so far, taking a lot of the responsibility for it. But she also says things like, Ben would have gotten us all killed. So while she takes some responsibility, she also justifies a lot of her actions. At the end of her impassioned speech, she looks at both of them and says, if you want to go, go. And I promise you, I will love you just as much. The kids do go, right into the car where Marty is waiting for them, and right behind them is Wendy. The happy family is heading home, and this is actually the first scene of part 1 of season 4. They're talking about their meeting with the FBI the next day. They're also talking about the gala, when all of a sudden, they're thrown off the road by a rogue semi-truck. They get into a pretty nasty accident. I assume they're driving a Subaru because somehow everybody survives. And what's the most amazing thing in the 4 years of this show is this car is tumbling. Really bad accident we're talking here. And no driver stops on the side of the road to see how they're doing. The birds just have to dust themselves off and take a cab back home. And when they get home, Father Benitez is waiting for him. He tells him that Nelson is missing and Omar is agitated about it. He wants to talk to him right away and see if they know anything about it. Marty tells Father Benitez, no problem, I just have to run a quick errand first. And that errand is going to talk to Ruth. Because after what he saw in the morning, he now thinks he knows what happened to Nelson. He asks her, is Nelson buried in your pool? And by her reaction, he knows the answer without her having to say a word. He lets her know that Omar is looking for Nelson and knows he's missing, but also Omar's about to be out of the picture. She should be safe, but just in case she's concerned, he can give her the name of a PI and get her a brand new identity. She doesn't want that. She's just going to ride this thing out. The last thing he has to talk to her about is the casino. He tells her that they're meeting with the FBI the next morning and they need assurances that they can continue to launder money through it. She is blown away that the FBI is involved, and Marty reminds her it's not a crime if the FBI is sanctioning it. So Ruth agrees that the next morning she'll sit down and hear them out. Marty then heads back home, and him and Wendy head to the prison to meet with Omar. He tells them that he knows it was Camilla who ordered the hit, and he gives them a phone number that they're supposed to call, and whoever's on the other end of that is going to take care of her. He then asks about Nelson, but he also thinks that was Camilla as well. The conversation then moves into busting him out, and the birds tell him exactly what he wants to hear, knowing that he's never getting out. The birds then leave the meeting with Omar and head right to the funeral home to have the meeting with Camilla, the FBI, and Ruth. Ruth shows up with Rachel. She filled Rachel in on everything, and Rachel's in a weird headspace having just killed Nathan. She's not used to that sort of thing. She suggests to Ruth that they get the hell out of there, but Ruth isn't about to do that. She's about to get the okay from the FBI to make a ton of money. The FBI hands both Rachel and Ruth papers guaranteeing their freedom from prosecution. The deal with Camilla, on the other hand, is going to have to be verbal. The meeting goes off without a hitch. Everybody seems to be on board. Afterwards, Wendy heads to the Lazy O since Nathan is leaving that day, but she's surprised to see Sam. Sam has decided that there's nothing really for him in the Ozarks anymore, and he has a calling now with the church. So he's heading with Nathan's congregation back to North Carolina to start a new life for himself. He seems really excited about this new opportunity, and Wendy gives him a hug and tells him goodbye. She does the same thing to her father, but she also lets him know that the Byrd Foundation is going to be making a very generous donation to the site dedicated to finding Ben. This will continue until he's found. This is going to allow Nathan to continue to do his work. While Nathan's girlfriend is excited for him, Nathan knows that it's nothing more than a payoff by his daughter, and it's dirty money. While she hugged Sam goodbye, she does not hug her father goodbye. She then heads home and gets ready for that night's gala, where all of the Byrds are dressed up and looking great. When they arrive at the Missouri Belle, Jim lets them know that no big donor has backed out. In fact, they're still fielding requests. The Byrd Foundation is about to be flooded with donor money. This is just the thing that Wendy needs to get out of the Schaefer business. She goes and finds him at the blackjack table and pulls him away and lets him know that he is off the board. She's instructed the people in Michigan and Wisconsin to pull his rigged voting machines. He tries to remind her that she needs him on this board, but she says, "No, we don't. Look upstairs." Oh, and we've also talked to our good friends at the FBI. This is going to be our first anti-corruption partnership. Schaefer is all but drowning, trying to tell Wendy she doesn't want to do this. She walks away and leaves Schaefer drowning. As the Byrds go and enjoy the rest of their night, the Omar phase of their plan is currently in action. Omar is transferred, but then all of a sudden, the vehicle he's in stops. The prison guard in the driver's seat shoots his partner and starts to let Omar out, handing him the gun and telling him there's an airplane right down the road. He's to take it and get out. But as soon as Omar gets maybe 5-10 steps ahead, he hears a gun cock back behind him, and he knows he was just set up. Omar starts trying to fire the gun that was handed to him, but it's empty. It only had one bullet in it. And a few seconds later, Omar Navarro is shot dead in what looks like a prison escape gone wrong. Back at the Missouri Belle, nobody is any of the wiser. In fact, the Byrds are yucking it up with Claire Shaw, and that's when the conversation is interrupted by Camilla. She first starts out congratulating the Byrds on the gala, but then she turns her attention to Claire Shaw, telling her she's glad she's there because she knows that Claire was with her son the night that he was murdered. Claire tries her best to play the Marty Byrd role lying, but she's not very good at it. And Camilla is quite intimidating. She tells Claire that if Claire is honest with her about who killed her son, she'll forgive her. But if she lies and Camilla finds out about it later on, not only will she get revenge for her son, but she'll also kill Claire in what can only be described as a very painful death. This results in Claire giving up Ruth real fast. As soon as she does, Marty knows that Ruth is all but dead. Claire starts to apologize, but it's too late. Camilla turns to one of her security guards and instructs him to go follow Ruth. She then looks at Wendy and tells her, "If you warn Ruth, or if I even sense that somebody's following me, I'll kill all of you." She then instructs another one of her security guards to kill Jonah and Charlotte if Marty or Wendy so much look at Ruth. Marty and Wendy get together trying to figure out what exactly they're supposed to do in this situation, but neither of them have an answer. The one idea that Wendy has is they still have the number for Navarro's hitman. They can call the hit on Camilla. But Marty knows that's not going to matter. They're moving him that night. He's probably already dead. The fact is, anything they try to do is going to end up being suicide. With all of that on their mind, they still have to host the gala. But as they're up there addressing the crowd, Ruth headed home early, and she was followed. When she gets to her house, she's surprised to see a Cadillac in the driveway. She has a pretty good idea that who's ever in that Cadillac isn't somebody you really want to see late at night, and she would be correct. It's Camilla. Camilla approaches her holding a gun and says, "Claire Shaw told me that you were the one who killed my son." And like the ultimate badass she is, Ruth looks her dead in the eye and says, "I'm not sorry. Your son was a murdering bitch, and now I know where he got it from." Camilla raises the gun, but she makes Ruth sweat it out, to the point where Ruth actually yells at her, "Are you going to do it or not?" And Camilla does. She shoots Ruth dead in her driveway. Later that night, the Byrds arrive back at home, trying to ponder their next move, when both Marty and Wendy notice that their house has been broken into, and there's somebody sitting out in their lawn. It's Mel Saddam, and he's holding the goat cookie jar that was given to Jonah by Ruth. He explains to him that after 4 days, he couldn't do his job. He couldn't stop thinking about them. And then he couldn't get the cookie jar out of his head. I mean, who doesn't ever fill a cookie jar? Like, that's weird behavior. And then also, why would she give it to a kid? That didn't make much sense. Except that kid, being Jonah, loved Ben. And Ben loved goats. So Mel kind of got this hunch that all of this might be connected. He broke into the house and was able to confirm. There are no cookies in there. There's just evidence. Marty and Wendy start telling Mel that they can pay them anything he wants. But Mel doesn't want their money. He looks at them both and says, "Don't you get it? You don't get to win. You don't get to be the Kochs or the Kennedys or whatever royalty you people think you are. World doesn't work like that." And Wendy asks him, "Since when?" You then hear somebody pump a shotgun, and it's Jonah. The screen then fades to black, and you hear the shotgun go off. And that is how Ozark ends. Thank you so much for checking this out. I really appreciate it. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Hit thumbs up if you liked it. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought it sucked. Let me know what you think of this finale. I am torn on whether I liked it or not. The whole fade to black thing, I think, has kind of been done by The Sopranos, and that didn't go well. But at the end of the day, this does prove it's the birds versus everybody, and the birds always win. Check out my merch store. I have shirts and whatnot. But thank you so much getting to this point of the recap. I really appreciate it.